Okay, hi, welcome to the EpiDoc tutorial series. In this session, Dr. Irene Vaginakis from the University of Bologna is going to talk about a general introduction to the EpiDoc guidelines. I'll hand over to you, Irene.
Thank you. So the EpiDoc guidelines that you may access at epidoc.stoa.org/gl. It's where you find guidance for on how to encode the specific aspects following the EpiDoc schema. And we are going to deal in detail some of these features in other videos. But for all the features that we are not going to deal with in detail, you can refer directly to the EpiDoc guidelines. So this is the homepage of the guidelines. And the very core of the guidelines are the four thematic list of guidelines pages, these four that we are going to look in a second. But before that, I want to show you that there are also some other interesting parts that you can access from the EpiDoc guidelines homepage. And you can find here some table of contents that align specific guidance for precise project or transcription styles and the general EpiDoc guidelines. And there's also some appendices where you can find, for example, a gentle introduction to markup for epigraphers, which you could find useful, perhaps, and also a glossary of some common terms. And there's also an index of TI elements. And here you can find also some externally maintained guidelines for specific projects. So, for example, here I just opened one of those for the DF-HG project. Here you can find a link to an external guidelines which are based on EpiDoc, but which are specific for this project. So now I'm going back to the four thematic lists. So there are four sections. The first one is the descriptive and historical data, and here you can find all the guidance related to the metadata, so the information about the inscription or other ancient documents, but also everything else that is not the ancient text of the document, so also guidance on how to build an apparatus or to provide the translation of the document or the commentary that you can add to that document. And then we have the text transcription, and here you will find all the details on how to encode all the Leiden convention inside the text, all the editorial intervention on the text, and so on, all the physical how to encode the physical features of the document, and so on. And in images and figures, you will find guidance, as it says, on how to provide links and captions for images and various kind of figures of the document, of the inscription. And then we have vocabularies and indexing terms, and this is related mainly to the ancient text. So it provides guidance on how to encode even more semantically relevant aspects of the text. So, for example, features that have been mentioned inside the text, so personal names, geographical names, and so on, but also how to index terms that appear outside the text, so also for other things that you would like to index from the metadata, for example. And I'm just opening the first one to show you what you can find here. Here we have a list, and for example, I'm clicking on this one, on the dimension of the support of the epigraphic text. Here, let's see how a page is structured. So we find in each page of the guidelines, in the upper left corner, a link to the TI guidelines related to the same elements. So all EpiDoc elements are TI elements, and by clicking here, you are redirected to the TI page in the TI guidelines related to that element. And here you can find a description about how to use a specific element for encoding, in this case, the dimension of the support. And for example, we see here that the element is dimensions, inside which we can use height, width, and depth for the three dimension aspects, but also a generic dim. We could support a type attribute for other dimensions, for example, for expressing the diameter of a circular cylindrical object. And in the guidelines, in each page of the guidelines, you will also find some examples showing real case of use, or specifically created example of use of such elements. So for example, here we have a dimensions with an attribute unit with a centimeter, and here we have a height, width, and depth for expressing these three dimensions. And at the end, there is also a See Also section, in which you can find other pages of the guidelines, yes, in which some of the elements that are mentioned here are also mentioned too. So let's go now to the very central part of the guidelines, that is the text transcription. Here we can see that the list of elements is very long, very specific, and all these aspects are grouped in this part. So we have some pages on the structure of the text, then we have a lot of pages about transcription, then we have the form and appearance, then the pages on the editorial interventions, and then the interpretation, some pages on the interpretation of some aspects like numerals or symbols. And here, let's open a page, for example, lost characters, quantity known. Here we can see a similar structure. So on this corner, we can see a link to the TI page on gap, which is the element which is used for unrestored lacunae. And again, we can find a descriptive part explaining how to use this element, which attributes can be provided, must be provided. And we have some examples. Here we have real examples coming from real inscriptions. And here, for example, we have a gap reason lost with also the attribute quantity expressing that the missing characters are 3, and the unit of this gap, this lacuna, is character. So we have 3 missing characters. And something that you might find useful are the transformations. So you can see how this aspect is encoded in EpiDoc, but you can also see how this markup is transformed in using different styles. For example, with the Duke databank style, you will have 3 dots inside square brackets, which are separated by some space. Or if you transform the same markup using the default Pancera style, you would find 3 dots, but more close between each other. And in this case, with the 6 missing characters instead of 3, with the databank style, you will have 6 dots, whereas with Pancera, you will have circa 6 characters, so you won't have the dots. So this shows in practice the principle of the XML markup. So you have you can have multiple different outputs from one single XML input. So and this also is important to keep in mind, because you can see that you don't have to focus on how do you want to your text to be displayed at the end. You have to focus on the semantic meaning that you are putting into your markup. So the point is that you want to say that 6 characters are missing, despite the fact of how they will be rendered in the end. And again, here you can find a See Also section pointing to other pages of the guidelines, which also mention the gap element. And going back to the other sections, the images and figures really is a one-page section, so you directly go to the page explaining how to insert links to images, photographs, drawings, and so on. And the vocabularies and indexing terms is strictly related to the encoding of really semantic elements in the text, and you can find here some examples, but provides you also some guidelines about how to use external or internal authority lists or taxonomies or vocabularies to classify, to standardize the way you mark up these elements, aiming at the indexing. So we are not going to show in details all the pages of the guidelines, but in some of the next videos you will find some details or some specific selection of specific pages of these guidelines. And I think it's all. Gabby, do you want to add anything more on this?
The only thing I'd add, thank you, Irene. Yes, the only thing I'd add is that I find when I want to find a page on the text transcription features, I do what you did here, and I go to the text transcription list, which gives you the whole entire long list, and I can more or less understand where to find what I'm looking for. For most users, I suspect, who are less familiar with the in-depth EpiDoc guidelines and don't need all that information, probably the shorter lists that you showed briefly at the beginning are probably slightly more useful. The I forget what we call them, tables of contents to specific Leiden styles, up a bit.
Yes, here.
Tables of contents by transcription styles. So so where an individual list, this, if you know you're using the Petraeus style, then it only gives you those 15 things that are in the Petraeus style rather than all 100 pages, which you may have, a little bit of confusion. But so those I think are quite often useful to people. But otherwise, I think that's that's all great. Thank you.
Okay.
And just finally to add that this tutorial is part of a series of tutorials on EpiDoc, which you can find at the URL at the link below.